Welcome back to the next piece of Intuition One. This is kind of a short piece. I just want to introduce you to the 24 senses. So we have more than just five senses. And I took this quote from Bob Samples. He wrote a book called Open Mind, Whole Mind. It's for parenting and teaching tomorrow's children. And it's an older book, but he just said something that I felt was really, really wonderful. He says current research suggests that we are not limited to the traditional five senses. For example, iron-rich molecules have been found in the faceplate bones of the sinus cavities. These molecules appear to be related to our ability to sense the Earth's magnetic field and provide an innate sense of direction. To emphasize a point, it may well be that infants, not yet knowing which senses are considered appropriate or socially acceptable, will use them all until they're taught to respond to life using the narrow range acceptable to society. So I want you to know that we have more than just five senses. We all grow up with the knowing that we have, sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. Yeah, that's five. And sight is for seeing visible light. Hearing is for vibrations in air locally. You happen to be within earshot. Touch is sensing tactile contact. Something actually touches us. And then there's taste. We put something in us, and that senses chemical molecular conditions. And then there's smell, and that senses olfactory molecular conditions. So taste is for chemicals, and smell is for molecules floating in the air. So that's about as far as most people go, but we have others. Let's cover those others. So in addition to the five that we all know about, there are additional senses. There's balanced movement, which is the ability to sense kinesthetic, geotropic conditions. In other words, movement, motion. We know if we're sitting off to the side, one side or the other. We know if we're upside down. We know, we feel. Energy is moving outward from the planet, and we're going to run headfirst into that if we're upside down, and we sense that. So that's our balance movement sense. We have vestibular senses, and that's a sense for repetitious movement. Repetitious movement is absolutely critical. Look at your heart. That repeats the same beat, boom, 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 over and over and over. We rock babies. We rock ourselves. I've seen some reporters doing interviews on television, and they're rocking back and forth. You can tell that they're living in a high stress environment. Rocking helps relieve that stress. Then we have temperature sensors. We can sense molecular motion. The greater the motion, the hotter it feels. Why? Because all those molecules, you stick your hand in that, and there's a lot of friction, and you will feel that as heat. So that's a temperature sense. And then we have pain, nociception senses. We were talking earlier about the pain centers in the brain, but you have all sorts of sensors in nerve endings around the entire body. And those, too much pressure, too much heat, too much cold, a cut or some sort of disturbance in the outer boundary of the body, and you have pain. So then we have eidetic imagery. We're going to talk about this a lot more when we get to Intuition 4, which is clairvoyance and the art of seeing. But we have the ability to retain a neuroelectrical image after we've looked at it. It'll be the opposite in color, but you'll see it in your mind's eye on the screen in your mind. So that's eidetic imagery. Next, we have magnetic senses, and that's the ability to sense ferromagnetic orientation. If you have a magnet and it's got a north and a south end, you can sense whether your hand is being pushed at or being pulled at, depending on which end you're at. That's the magnetic sensing. And you can feel the field. The field is actually frequencies moving. We have infrared sensors, and infrared is the ability to sense these long electromagnetic waves. Infrared is it's infrared heat or infrared kinds of healing chambers are wonderful. They warm you without doing any burning, kind of thing. So that's infrared. And then in contrast to that, we also have ultraviolet. Ultraviolet are sensing short electromagnetic waves. So it's just the opposite of the long electromagnetic waves. So we have infrared and then ultraviolet. So here's a few more senses. Ionic is the next one. Ionic senses can tell whether the air is negatively or positively charged. And why can we tell that? Because it smells fresh when it's negatively charged. When you have a rainstorm or a thunderstorm and big storm moves through the area, you go outside and it smells so fresh and it's refreshing. Years ago, I had an ionic generator and I put it on the sewing machine. I had my sewing machine up against the wall and I left that generator there. Maybe a couple months later, I moved that for some reason. I had just dusted around it before, but I actually looked at the wall behind the ionic generator and it was dirty. It was almost turning black. And that told me right there that ionic generators collect dirt out of the air, and that's why it's so refreshing. It collects it and it deposits it on your wall or whatever it's next to, but it leaves the air very clean. So next we have vomeronasal nasal, and those are pheromones. We all have heard about pheromones. They're involved in sexual attraction. They are something that, everybody is a specific arrangement of frequencies. And that arrangement of frequencies creates their physical self, their chemical self, and their smell. And when people are not compatible in terms of smell, usually it doesn't work out. Years and years ago, I had a fine gentleman who was madly in love with me and he wanted to marry me. And I dated him for a while. I liked being with him, but I couldn't stand his smell. He had this intrinsic smell, is what I called it. And finally, I had to admit to him that I was not about to accept a proposal, that I was breaking up. And I never did have the courage to tell him why, but it was because he smelled, his chemistry and mine just did not mix. So he probably didn't smell at all to anybody else. But to me, it was like, no. So that's an example of pheromonic sensing. And in that case, it was very strong. Okay. Next, we have the proximal senses. You've all heard the term proximity. So proximal senses allow us to sense how close something is physically. You know, if you were blindfolded and you were walking, you would be, all your proximal senses would be up. Am I going to run into something? When something gets real close, your energy sort of bounces off of it and you can kind of tell, oh, there's something here. Slow down, that kind of thing. So next we have electrical senses, and that's just the ability to sense surface charges. You've all had the experience of maybe walking across, a dry carpet to turn on an electric light. You get a shock. And as you're getting close, you're going to get a shock because you can feel the energy build, and then poof, you get a shock. So that's electrical sensing. Barometric sensing is next, and that is the ability to sense atmospheric pressure. When atmospheric pressure drops and there isn't as much pressure holding the body together, the body swells and your joints ache, your head aches, you don't have any energy. Everything, your blood, I think, actually slows down. So that's barometric pressure. Some people will feel changes in barometric pressure right before an earthquake. They will get a terrible headache. So we have some very powerful senses, and we don't really acknowledge, or we aren't really taught to acknowledge what the many things are that we can pick up, tune into. And this is just the beginner's list. So geogravimetric senses are next. Sensing differences in mass. You can tell how big something is. The closer you get to it, the bigger it becomes. And there are blind people who have been taught to use proximal senses and geogravimetric senses perfectly. They navigate through a room. They don't run into anything. They see with these additional senses. It's not really seeing. They sense what's around them using these other senses. So these are the extra 19 that came in Bob Sample's book, Open Mind, Whole Mind. But let's add a few more. These are the intuitive senses. So there's clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, clairnascence, and clairgustance. So clairvoyance is seeing, clairaudience is hearing, clairsentience is knowing or feeling, clairnascence is smell, and clairgustance is taste. Okay? So let's go a little deeper into clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is a broad term for a variety of psychic abilities that can generally be thought of as seeing. You could also, just as correctly, think of it as knowing. We see, know. But when you're having a clairvoyant moment, some people will say, I have a feeling that, whatever it is, even though they are seeing something. Here's the thing. To become fully clairvoyant, you must be able to visualize on demand, to notice or recognize small visions or mental images when they appear in the corner of your awareness, and to interpret the symbolism they usually contain. You will often see symbolism, okay? Because consciousness is using the symbols, patterns that have been loaded into your brain. The images that appear during visualizations and visions contain highly specific information for you. The more you pay attention to the information, the more information will come to you and the better you'll get at making wise decisions. So that's clairvoyance. Okay. Clairaudience is next. To become clairaudient, you must be able to hear within. Sometimes you'll hear your own voice talking to you in your head. That's a form of clairaudience. Sometimes it'll be a strange or unknown voice. Totally unfamiliar. Other times you will notice or recognize small messages in the middle of an ordinary conversation. All of a sudden, a phrase kind of jumps out at you and that's all you hear and you don't hear the rest of it. Sometimes there are changes in the quality of sound. or sounds that overlap ordinary speech and conversation. You know, a crash or you know, somebody yells no just as somebody's telling you what they're going to do. That's an overlap, and that's a message. There can also be changes in the tone, the quality, and the character of auditory perception. You must also be able to recognize the character and nature of the message coming to you and the information it contains. You can't use it if you don't understand the message it contains. And sometimes you'll sit with that information for a while before you go, oh, I get what that meant. So that's clairaudience. Next, we have clairsentience. And to become clairsentient, it's really not difficult because this is the primary clair. Even though clairvoyance is highly prized, everybody is a little bit clairsentient, and some people are a lot clairsentient. They are empathic. They can't separate themselves from other people unless they specifically are taught to do that. So to become clairsentient, you must be able to feel at many levels. You have to be able to notice the minute changes that occur from moment to moment in yourself, in your feeling state, or in somebody else's. And then you correctly track these feelings and their connections to the actions and events going on around you. And to recognize the significance of the messages and information that come to you at the feeling level. So all of those signify clairsentience and different degrees of clairsentience. The more you practice inner silence, the more clairsentient and telepathic you become. So clairsentience is feeling. Feeling is primary. Some people will say, I just know things. They know things because they're interpreting a set of feelings. They may not recognize what they're doing, but that's what it is. So that's clairsentience. Next, we have kind of a challenge for the clairs. The big challenge with all intuitive information and psychic ability is once you see, hear, or feel something clearly, you must have the guts to take that seriously. You have to honor that knowing, the message, or the feeling. You have to learn to take it into account as you make decisions and take action. And only when you can smoothly integrate this new information into your life and use it to make good choices can you say you are clairvoyant, clairaudient, or clairsentient. If you see it and you don't do anything with it, you're not really being clairvoyant. If you hear it and you don't do anything, or you know it and you don't take it into account, then you're not really being or using your own clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, whatever. So the next sense is the next clair is clairnascence. And clairnascence is the ability to smell something or someone or some condition that's not present at the moment. In other words, we're talking about non-local, and that means non-local in space and time kinds of abilities. So clairnascence is the ability to put your consciousness in another time or another location and pick up information about that time and place. It includes being able to discover hidden individuals, perhaps somebody trying to hide from you. It includes the ability to find lost individuals, sometimes lost individuals who have died. Or it can include the ability to smell various metals, chemicals, water, or even events before they happen. People with clairnascence can sometimes predict things like fire They smell smoke and it hasn't happened yet. Or explosions before they happen. So clairnascence is one of those handy things. And it often goes with clairvoyance in that you can, like clairgustance, you'll see and smell or see and taste something. We're going to talk about clairgustance in just a minute, but it's a cross-modal. This is frequently a cross-modal perception type of sense. You're seeing something clairvoyantly and you're smelling it. And in the case of clairgustance, you're tasting it. So, okay. The last one of the clairs is clairgustance. And clairgustance is the ability to taste something without putting it in your mouth. It can also occur as cross-modal sensing, as in tasting a vision or a sound. Cross-modal perception is it's quite shocking when it happens because it is as clear, the taste is as clear as the vision is. And anyway, clairgustance allowed the ancient people to learn and use certain plants and substances while avoiding those that might cause harm. Very, very handy, especially if you're out in the wild. People with clairgustance will often be able to read a recipe and know what the finished food will taste like. And they will look at a food and they will know what effect it will have in the body. So that's clairgustance. Those are the clairs. Now, the biggest challenge with all intuitive information and psychic ability is once you see, hear, feel, we should say smell, add smell or taste something clearly, you must have the guts to take seriously that knowing, that message, or that feeling. You have to learn to take it into account as you make decisions and take action. You can't poo-poo it. Otherwise, you're not really clairvoyant. Only when you can smoothly integrate this new information into your life and use it to make good choices can you say you are clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, clairnascent, or clairgustant. So keep in mind that the development and use of intuition is dependent partly on your ability to expand your attention, to include input from all senses, partly on input coming from within you, the part of you that knows, and partly on your ability to integrate common sense into that information, and partly on your ability to respond to what you know, regardless of how awkward the input leaves you feeling or how unscientific or unprovable that knowing may be. That's when you have truly become intuitive. When you're paying attention to the input, you're paying attention to what's happening around you, common sense, and you're integrating all of that smoothly. So, and you don't need to have, science or proof to back you up. You have yourself. You don't have to broadcast everything. You just watch and wait and see. You prepare, and when you need that information, you use it. Okay? Intuition and the clairs are like muscles. The more you exercise these and use your intuition, the more you will develop your consciousness. And the more you develop your consciousness, the more expansive your worldview becomes. And the more expansive your worldview becomes, the more intuition you will have. You will begin to see what is. You will begin to see how things work. You will begin to be able to identify patterns in a hot second. And you will know whether that pattern is good or bad, and whether therefore it's going to have a good or bad outcome. Okay, so that's intuition. Use your intuition. Thank you for watching.